And how's it going? And welcome to No Fun Allowed. Today you are joined by a very special guest, Jay.
Hi there.
Yeah, so for those of you that don't know, that's going to be popping up on the screen right now, but Jay is doing up some amazing write-ups for Rime of the Frostmaiden. So can you go ahead and tell us a little bit about that as we start diving into all this?
Well, I've been, like everyone else, I think, diving deep into Rime of the Frostmaiden ever since it came out in September. And as I've done for a few years, I've written up a guide, an extensive how-to troubleshooting guide for the adventure, because I think it has a lot of potential, but also some issues that I wanted to cover, which I've been publishing on the DM's Guild and also in blog form, parts of it on my own webpage. So yeah, basically going through the module and trying to see where it might be difficult or fall short and see what can be done about that.
Absolutely. You know, all these modules, every single 5th edition module, they have an amazing story there. But more often than not, you have to start digging yourself to try and, unearth the thing. And Rime of the Frostmaiden, I do feel like if you read it as is and try to run it as is, you might run into some roadblocks. So it's definitely helpful to go ahead and get another person's perspective on how we can go ahead and approach things. So going into that, the first thing I want to go over today is, what is the story of this module? Is there actually a story to this module, do you think?
Well, that is, in fact, one of the biggest potential issues with the module. Because as far as I see it, the module has a story, but it also has more than one. It has maybe up to 3 or 4 stories, depending on how you look at it. And it doesn't do a terribly good job at explaining exactly how these stories fit together, if they even do fit together, and what the primary story is and why your players should necessarily care about that throughout the adventure, from level 1 to level 12 or when it ends. And that's something I think that other adventures have been usually do a better job of, I'd say, than in Rime of the Frostmaiden. But it does have a story. In fact, it has a rich story, a few rich stories that just buried a bit in there. So you have to dig them out and polish them off and fit them together. And that's what I've been trying to do as well, yeah.
Yeah, so do you think that the structure of this module helps or hinders the story in regards of all the many chapters and then it being a sandbox and then there's Durgard plot of chapters and then there's the Auril plot of chapters?
Yeah, I think, and just because I didn't answer your question straightforwardly, the story should be, or seems to be, ending Auril's everlasting rime and restoring Icewind Dale and 10 towns. And the way the adventure is structured, it starts out as this sandbox and then narrows into actually going to an buried necropolis and finding a way to end Auril's everlasting rime. And I think the structure, unfortunately, in this case, hinders the story because, as I see it, the creators have had some really cool pieces, and it seems like it has been made piecemeal. So you have a group of creators creating this content, another group of creators creating some other content, and then fitting it together. And I think could have spent a bit more time with the glue because the parts are really great, but they're not structured very well. And I think it can be very difficult in the start, especially for newer DMs, to start out in an open sandbox. And then it gets easier to play it to go on, perhaps, but you'd rather start easy and get progressively harder, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's a tough one because, starting as a DM, you got to read through this module and you got to suss out what's going on. You got to suss out all the NPCs' motivations and the world around them. But equally as challenging is you have to get your players motivated. So what is the motivation for the players? Are they heroes simply to be heroes? Or, what is going on with that? Are they just people that rise up to the occasion, or do they get thrust into the adventure?
And then there's another thing that I think the adventure could be more helpful explaining, because it doesn't really go that much into motivation. Not in the start and not throughout. I think it tries to touch on it a bit. Like you can give them a reward for this, or maybe you could suggest that ending the curse can be done in this place. But other adventures, or some other adventures, would be more clear about why the players should be motivated, and help the DMs create that motivation and keep it consistent throughout. Because in the end, to me at least, it doesn't really matter if the heroes are motivated by being heroes or doing good or becoming rich and famous, as long as they get to consistently keep that motivation throughout. Because if I expect them to go through the first 3 chapters for greed, and then suddenly care about innocent lives halfway through the adventure, their characters might not be the right characters for that transition, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And as written, the adventure most of the time expects them simply to be heroes, for the sake of heroism, or to be greedy and not care about much else. And I think it's a bit confused on the motivation, at some points.
Yeah, so another driver of that motivation is the PC secrets. Those things were given out, and they are supposed to drive people to do certain things, whether they just learn a bit of information about the world, or it directly ties them to an NPC, or, something is going to happen to them bad later down the line. Do you think those secrets make, the motivations for the players any better or worse, or do you feel as if they aren't really necessary?
I think the secrets are a really cool touch. It's one of the creative things that I felt like the team has tried to do, and I think it succeeds most of the time at what it is. It's a secret. It can flesh out a background. It can create some interesting character moments. But as far as driving motivation, there's not a whole lot of that. I don't see that in the sample background hooks there's in the book as well. On some of the first pages, like if you're an acolyte, you may be an Icewind Dale for this or that reason, but there's not a whole lot of them that ties the adventurers to the story. Like, why would you save Icewind Dale? Just to be a hero, or could we maybe create some deeper motivation? And I think a better job could have been done of that. It feels like the person or the people who wrote the secrets may not have even been able to read chapter 6 and 7 at that point, and I think that's maybe even how it was done.
We do have some information that there was parts of the adventure that were dissected by different people. Specifically chapters 1 and 2. Those were just a series of fun little one-shot ideas, right? But they were just thrown into the world, which fits. You can have those fun little areas and plot hooks and stuff, but trying to tie it all into the grand scheme of things can certainly be tough. And speaking of that, we have the exposition versus the foreshadowing of this module, right? We have, this big ol' epic campaign of, okay, Auril is trying to freeze the place over, and there's devils, and there's the Duergar, and, there's da-da-da. So, unfortunately, if you read it as is, a lot of information can be missed. The Duergar, for example. If your players don't go to East Haven and they don't do, a quest, then they could theoretically skip the Duergar. They could theoretically do quests where they never interact with Auril's agents. And as written, Auril isn't actually a presence in the world. So how do you address the exposition versus the foreshadowing? How do you give your players ideas about what's going on without it being just an info dump that you slam on top of them?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct about both points, that there's in some places too much exposition, and at other places you're really missing the foreshadowing. I think as far as the Duergar plotline goes, as long as the DM is aware of that plotline starting in Caerconic, Cardinal, or East Haven, they can do something to steer them towards that, and then that storyline is actually decently fleshed out. You go to Caer Konig, then you can maybe go to Caer Dineval, and then Easthaven, and then off to Sunbright Fortress. Aurils agents, which there are only 2 of, as far as I can recall, in 10 towns, and one of them you may run into in the most remote corner of 10 towns, and the other one isn't supposed to appear before chapter 2, and then only if you run a specific quest. So what I've been doing, I've actually written the blog series quite recently, where I've gone over some of the content in my earlier guides and updated it, and it's focused especially on foreshadowing, and trying to make sure that the characters run into Aurils agents, hear about them in different places, and that we can maybe tie them together with the Duergar, so these storylines also tie better together, such as the Duergar and the Frost Druids having an alliance, where the Frost Druids help the Duergar gather Charterlin and are bringing them to the surface to help destroy 10 towns, which is also Auril's motivation, while the Duergar in turn can keep the Frost Druids informed about the Arcane Brotherhood, who are looking for this necropolis the Frost Druids want to keep hidden, and stuff like that. So you can tie them together and make sure that when the adventurers encounter one part, they also learn about the other, group. Yeah. Is it Auril or Auril, or how did you pronounce it?
It's supposed to be pronounced Auril because it used to be pronounced
Auril,
Auril,
okay.
But that it doesn't sit well these days.
Okay, yes. Okay. So can you say it for me again?
Auril.
Auril. Okay, I'll try to remember that.
But I mean, it doesn't matter what you call it, as long as the memes are kept to a minimum at your table, I guess. But
try to keep it clean.
Speaking of Auril's purpose in this campaign, you did touch upon it that Auril has some motivations, but if you read that book, it literally states there her motivations are beyond human comprehension because she is a god. Simple as that, right? But unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, these days we want more. We want to understand what makes the villain tick. We want to understand why people do things. And we need to comprehend what is her motivation. So what is her motivation? What is she actually doing? And what are her worshippers actually up to in the land of Icewind Dale?
Yeah, I think I just said it in a way that made it sound like I knew the truth about her motivations. But as you're saying, I don't, because they're not written in the book, or at least not very clearly. That's simply the motivation I've chosen for Auril, because I think it makes sense. And I think you're right that we need to know more about her motivations as DMs. I think it's perfectly fine for the players to maybe never realize why she's doing what she's doing, but as a DM, you need to know, because you need to roleplay this character. You need to plan for them. You need to know what are they after, and if you don't know her motivations, you can't freestyle, or you can't change anything in the book. You can only run it by the book, and that sucks, I think. So her motivation, as I see it, is to some mixture of wanting to keep Ithrin a secret, her greatest secret, her most beautiful secret, and also maybe that's just how I've done it in my game and in the blog series I've done, to drive the people of 10 towns into desperation, so they will worship her to simply survive. I'll freeze everything, and only by accepting my blessing and becoming one of my followers will you be able to survive. And that is also why she's, or her agents, the Frost Druids, are going around 10 towns, and this is also something I've added, going around 10 towns and suggesting to people that they start performing these sacrifices, causing chaos with awakened animals, and urging the Duergar to attack 10 towns and throw the towns further into desperation. So yeah, I think her motivation should be to keep Ithrin safe and hidden and destroy 10 towns.
Yeah, and I think that, if you are on the brink of civilization and there's nothing left, then even if you are a so-called, misaligned or evil aligned group, you are still going to go ahead and try and fight for whatever you have, because if the 10 towns get destroyed, then you're kind of boned. You're going to freeze to death if there's nobody to shack up with, right? So, so now that we've gone over a little bit of Auril's motivations here, I wanted to start dissecting all of the chapters a little bit here, because we get some information in the back of the book, in the front of the book, you know, but the real meat of the campaign, of course, is throughout the entirety of the campaign, because while, of course, we as DMs are pertinent to all the information all around, the players only see what is presented in front of them. So to start off with, we have chapters 1 and 2, which are a sandbox. They stand out amongst the rest of the campaign because the rest of the campaign is a railroad, and chapters 1 and 2 are a sandbox. Yeah. So what is the purpose of chapters 1 and 2? Is it a sandbox just for a sandbox sake?
And that's a very good question. I think that I don't think they're necessarily a sandbox for a sandbox sake. I think they're really strong attempt at making a compelling setting for Icewind Dale. And I think they do that reasonably well. I think having different quests in 10 towns and Icewind Dale and quite a few cool locations. I'm pretty impressed with most of the locations. I think that's awesome. But I think the writers, once again, I think what we're looking at is 10 different pieces. If we're looking at chapter 1, that are fitted together, maybe even by 10 different people, probably not, but a handful of different people, and no one person has sat down and said, all right, so where would we? Can we give some suggestions about where to start? Maybe just 2 or 3, and a starting plot line, maybe a line through, a bit more cohesiveness. So, because a very experienced DM that picks up this book will read chapter 1 and 2 and then do their own thing, regardless. Even if it said start here and do this, that they would do that if it suited them, or they would do something else. But a new DM, or just DMs that want to play published adventures, to have more to lean on, to not have to plan as much. I think having a bit of a plan, just a loose structure, is something that's really helpful. So it's cool to have a sandbox. It's a bit too early in the campaign, and I think it needs a bit more guidance. But it can be fixed. You just have to do a bit of research. So,
absolutely. Yeah. You know, and, you know, sometimes we would like to think that we can go ahead and just have a world open for our players and they can do whatever the heck they want to. But I personally find that a little bit of drive and motivation and nudging goes ahead and makes the campaign so much better. So speaking of that, you know, we have chapters 1 and 2. They just open you up into Icewind Dale. You run around, you explore around, you get into some fun little quest. How much foreshadowing can we cram into these 2 chapters? Because chapters 1 and 2, as we've stated before, they really stand out from the other chapters. And arguably, once chapter 3 goes down, specifically chapter 4 goes down, that is when a lot of the campaign is going to change. But if they didn't pick up on that, then it's going to come out of left field, right? So how much foreshadowing should we, you know, throw into these first couple of chapters?
I think that, I don't know, have you played Princess of Apocalypse or read it?
Yes.
Okay. It's not my favorite adventure by any stretch of 5e. But one thing that I liked that it did was that it had events that were separated from locations necessarily, but it would happen at certain times, or could happen when the DM wanted them to happen. I think that's what 10 Towns and Icewind Dale needs, because you have a lot of locations, and if the characters end up going to the right locations, all right, they'll figure some things out. But if they don't, there's nothing to tell them that. At some point, a guy comes up and says, go investigate the Durga, even if you haven't heard about them, as per the book. Whereas we can fit in foreshadowing, such as first town they arrive in, or the second town they arrive in, they see a sacrifice being made, and the townfolk, some are protesting because it was they don't believe that the frost druid that told them to sacrifice this person were in the right, or you can have the Duergar show up to try and steal something, regardless of where the characters are in 10 towns, or you can have the characters run into Valeur in chapter 1, and she's looking for the Professor Orb, and she asks the party for help so that we know her when she arrives later. You can put in all these little events, but it would be nice if the book suggested that to us. And I think that that's something as a DM that it really pays off putting some thought into where can I put in just 1, 2, 3 little pieces of foreshadowing during the sessions we're in chapter 1.
Yeah, I'm a really big proponent of introducing the Arcane Brotherhood early, and I'm also I also subscribe to the idea that it doesn't need to be Velen that is the group's patron. I think that it could be any one of the other 4, because Velen. It's weird. Velen's stat block says that she's neutral, but it also says that she's willing to kill people. So that's a little bit weird, but whatever. So, of course, we talked about this. The whole chapters 1 and 2 are just this pure sandbox early on. But do you think that there should be some reversal here? Do you think that chapters 1 and 2 should be transformed more into a railroad, and then some part later on transformed into a sandbox?
I think that it should be an option. I'll try to take the middle road here, because I know some parties, some players that would love the sandbox feel of just going straight into it, no direction, no nothing, and the DM that would love that, picking out plot hooks out of a hat or something. That's not my style personally. I like, as I think you suggested as well, a bit of a structured sandbox. So something like 2 or 3 leads out there at all times, and sort of what do you call it, a direction the party is going. There's a drive. We know what we're doing and where to go next, or at least have some ideas. And what I've suggested in my guide and in the blog series is that I think the adventure seems logically should start around the northern part of 10 towns, because there's the easier quests there. There's the chance to run into a frost druid, and then can transition into the southern or eastern part of 10 towns with the Konig, Cardinal, and East Haven, where they'll pick up the Duergar plot once they're around level 3 or 4, and then you can establish a structure around finding the Duergar fortress instead of just giving them a map, having them go into Icewind Dale and actually head into some of these locations in chapter 2 to find someone that knows where the Duergar is holed up. So you get to experience some of that content as well before, at level 5, maybe getting to the Duergar fortress. Sort of how I would structure it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you're reading that, if you go up against the Duergar, in that fortress, and your group is level 4, then they're gonna get wiped. The difference between level 4 and 5 is insane. Something you briefly mentioned is giving them a map. Do you think that you should actually give your players a map of Icewind Dale where they can see everything and see all the 10 towns?
I'd do it. Yeah.
Okay.
I did it, and I have no. It's a rather trivial thing in a real world, having a map. Maybe not so much in a frontier setting such as this. It could be more rare with maps, but 10 towns have existed for hundreds of years. So yeah, I'd say they could definitely run by a map or get one by the first friendly NPC they meet, and that will help them also make decisions about where to go and what to do next. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that can easily be a very easy rapport-building quest of, that NPC says, hey, I'll give you a map if you do this for me. And then, bam, they get a map pretty early on. They build a relationship with an NPC, and it all works out in the end. So your players build up this reputation all around the 10 towns, and then eventually they either know for a fact that Duergar are up to something, or, as per written, they could potentially just get told, hey, there's Duergar, go ahead and find it out. So what are chapters 3 and 4 actually for in this campaign? Do they add anything? Do they take anything away from this campaign? What are your thoughts on the Duergar subplot?
That's an excellent question, and I've spoken with a few different people about chapter 3 and 4 in particular, because I really like it. I love these chapters. I think they're great. I like the idea. I love D&D when it's not just delving into a dungeon or clearing a basement or what it is, but also the more dynamic part, racing against a dragon back to 10 towns and trying to save as much as you can. That's not to say that it's perfectly executed, the ideas in here, or that the motivation is very strong, because it isn't. But that's something we as a DM can fix. I like what chapter 3 and 4 promises, and then we just have to work a bit to make it deliver on that, or make them deliver on that promise. So I don't think they destroy anything. They don't add that much, if we're being honest. You could skip chapter 3 and 4 if you don't like them. You can easily take that whole section out of the adventure and run it, no issues. You just have to spend more time in Icewind Dale. But I think that if the players seem to care about the world they live in, 10 towns, and the citizens there, having that dragon threat and having them work to try and save 10 towns, that's something that can create real drama and emotion. I think that's great to have. Yeah.
Especially if you spend however many sessions, all the way through chapters 1 and 2, making all these friends in the towns, exploring each of the 10 towns, or maybe not all of them, but majority of them. And then seeing, hey, they could potentially get destroyed. You're going to want to save them because you have friends everywhere. And once again, if civilization collapses, then you're boned. So that is the real question here, right? Is, do we destroy the 10 towns? Because as written, if you read that thing, your players aren't going to save it. There's no way. There's no way.
And I think that's a known fact by now. I hope so. At least, or it needs to be repeated, I guess. If you played chapters 3 and 4 as written, everything's gonna die except maybe Brynchanda. You have a chance at saving Brynchanda. Everything else is gone. No chance. It's simply not doable. And that's a bit sad, I think. I suggest going more lenient on the travel rules, allowing for faster speeds, more realistic speeds, as I would say. I live in Denmark, and I've not been to Greenland, but I know people that have, and a sled dog traveling, 1 mile per hour?
1 mile an hour, and after, a time, you have to rest. And
yeah, that's a bit far from the truth, even in heavy snow. So you can easily
I feel like you could run a mile in an hour, right?
In heavy snow. So yeah, you can easily bump up the travel speeds and make it more possible for the players to actually catch up to the dragon and save some of the towns. And I think that's also where it gets interesting, because I think we should destroy 10 towns if the players make really poor decisions. But we also want to put them in a spot where every decision they make matters. So do we go around the mountains because we think that'll be faster when we have to get back chasing the dragon, or do we go straight down the mountains while risking avalanches and getting lost? As we cross the tundra, do we go through the blizzard even though we might run into more encounters? Do we take a long rest before going in? And every decision, every delay, more people dead. And when you get to 10 towns, as you said as well, if you've made friends in Bremen, how do you say it in English?
I believe it's pronounced Bremen.
Okay, Bremen. If you have friends in Bremen, do you skip over Targos and let 1,000 people die or 500 people die to save a little town because you have a friend there, or do you? So I think it creates a lot of cool scenarios. As far as destroying everything, again, if they really don't care and mess everything up, then yeah, you destroy everything and have them live with the consequences. That's how I'll do it. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, if you destroy 10 towns because of their consequences, both the PCs and the players are going to learn. They're going to learn.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool, because if you say, hey, there's a dragon, and they say, whatever, and then you say, all right, you destroy everything, and then they're like, ooh, maybe next time the DM says he's going to destroy something. Right?
Yeah,
So
they'll also learn about the time pressures and stuff. I think it's yeah, it's very
yeah,
what I
so
like
another
about it.
thing that comes out of chapter 4 in particular is as soon as your players climb up Sunblight, they see the dragon, it flies off, and then they say, "Oh, we need to chase that thing." They head back down. Then Velen just happens to be right there, right at the right time, and then she says, "Hey, I just happen to be following you guys because of da da da. Let's go. And by the way, I'm going to tell you everything about what's going on in Icewind Dale right now." That is the
Yeah,
biggest exposition dump I think I've ever seen in any of these modules. She tells about the Arcane Brotherhood, and then she says about the city, and then you know, how do we fix this tremendously large info dump?
yeah. That's one of the things that really stood out to me when first reading through Frostmaiden, where a lot of the way you're going, okay, when are the players going to learn about this and that? What's going to happen? Then she shows up at the end of chapter 4. Okay, that's where they learn about everything.
Everything.
There's been so little foreshadowing, so little opportunity to learn about anything before Velen jumps into the picture and just says it all. Yeah. So first off, what I've and I'll preface it by saying that there's a ton of different ways to do this. So what I'm saying here is just one way that I've gone about fixing it. I suggest having the dragon be released in the forge during a battle as a last resort. That could also explain why it's easier to kill than maybe a giant dragon would be, challenge rating wise. And then having Velen maybe be present in the forge or near the forge. She's been snooping around looking for Ithrin. The Durgav caught her. Maybe they're looking to give over to the frost roots they're working with, if you're going with that line. In any event, the dragon's release seems less coincidental, and Velen's arrival or appearance is less coincidental. As far as the info dump goes, it's hard to avoid doing some exposition at this point if you haven't woven it in more earlier. But I think we could use, or what I suggest is using Velen as we call it a motor to actually make a bit more of a sandbox out of the rest of the adventure. So she'll arrive. She still knows that there's this city under the glacier. She doesn't know where exactly. It's supposed to be under the glacier. That's a huge thing. You have to figure out where exactly. And as far as she knows, it can be opened with the codicil of white. But she doesn't know where it is. So you still have some exposition, but you're not going to just give them all the answers. You can let the players then, okay, how do you figure out where exactly is Ithrin or the entrance to Ithrin? And how do we get this codicil of white, and where is that? Which allows you to put in locations such as Jarlmood or the Dark Duchess, where they can maybe find the professor, or they can ask the frost giant spirits at Jarlmood, or they can go to the Lost Spire of Netheril, where the Sun spirit maybe knows where the city of Ithrin is, or something like that. So that somehow fixes the info dump. And as you mentioned, you can even skip Velen and just have it have one of the other members of the Arcane Brotherhood tell them, or have them find Professor Scanned, or what do I know. There's a bunch of ways to do it. The way it's written in the module is not my favorite way to do it.
Well, honestly, one of the cardinal sins there is they did a thing where, oh, Velen can't die. Screw that. If you have a stat sheet, if you have HP, you can die at any time. This isn't Skyrim. You don't have a crown floating over your head. You don't take 200 damage and then get knocked out for a couple of seconds. Screw that. If you die, you die. End of the story.
Exactly. I think that's also, and I hate if it sounds like we're just dumping on an adventure, because it's really hard writing these adventures, and the people who've written it are talented people, and I think some of these things have maybe been a bit rushed. But the whole point of her not being able to die, or the worst thing about it, is that it's not even necessary. There's no requirement for that. She could easily have a notebook on her person detailing everything in that exposition dump that the players can find afterwards. There's really no reason to give her what you call it, a plot armor, or
yeah.
Not
at all. I mean, and I think it actually fits well, because she could build up all this information, and then she dies, and then another Arcane Brotherhood member shows up and says, oh, good,
Yeah.
you know all that information, and one of my rivals is dead. Win-win. You know, I think that could fit in so well. So we briefly, you're mentioning, you know, ways we can tie in your players actually figuring out that they need to go to Auril's Abode, Chapter 5. So once they learn this information, whether that's because Valen just knows it off her cuff, or you go to one of these locations and actually learn, you know, in-game wise, why you need to go there. Is Chapter 5, Auril's Abode, the Island of Solstice, is this a caper where you have to go in there, steal something, and then get the heck out of there? Or is this a full-blown assault that you're going to do at the end of the campaign?
I wouldn't run it at the end of the campaign. That's just me, maybe, but I don't think it's a very... I think it's a location that has a lot of cool concepts or mini encounters, but as far as a final encounter area, like epic, there's not any terrain features. There's no, I don't know. I don't think it suits. It works as well as an end stage. As far as it being a caper or an assault, I think that's an interesting question, because you don't really know, do you, when you read it? Like, how is this supposed to play out? Well, I didn't at first, at least, because you're reading through it and it makes it sound like, okay, you can go in there, you can actually kill Auril early on, but then when you read a bit close, you're like, okay, maybe that's not quite the intention. Maybe the intention is that they sneak in and not run into Auril, but why then have her there? And there's a lot of questions. What I've proposed to do, and I've done in my game, is replacing Auril with an agent, a frost druid giant. It could be anything. You can go with whatever, a frosty archmage or what have you. Someone that's a bit less powerful than Auril, but can serve as a mini boss at that location, and maybe as a catalyst for summoning Auril. I think it runs best as a caper, and I think that requires the PCs to get some help from Berlin if they have a Werther or Professor Scant or whoever they have, to maybe let them know that, all right, this place is really dangerous, but we know that whoever's in that building leaves at night to go cast a spell, so maybe we chill around and wait until she's gone, get in, try to find the codicil of White. Then you have to work a bit with the time, because the challenges within can take like 4 days to complete, so you have to do a bit of adjusting there. But then you can have her, whether it's Auril or someone else, arrive back at the fortress to chase them out, maybe making an epic escape instead of like, let's go ahead in and kill everything. So I think it works best as a caper, yeah.
Yeah, I agree, because you know, just I think it's a lot more fun if you're like, okay, she's literally a goddess, we can't fight her. Yeah. But then, of course, if you read it, you can fight her. But if you run it as written, she can just go ahead and just have her rock kill anybody by picking them up and then get yeeted, you know, hundreds of feet away, right? They're pretty much dead. So trying to fight her and a rock at her early level would just be a death sentence. You know, it's really weird. It's really odd. The challenges, the trials of Auril, I think, are some of the most favorite things I've done running it and reading it. They were absolutely a blast, and you know, I think that they really fit well into the game in regards of showing off, you know, how far are people willing to go ahead and stop this everlasting winter? Are they willing to commit murder? Are they willing to, you know, push themselves to death? All that fun jazz. So your players finally do these trials. They sneak right underneath Auril's nose, or in your case, of course, which is something I recommend, is having just an agent of Auril be there. They get the Codicil White. Then they got to take this Codicil White and trek all the way across the world, the largest distance of travel that you'll ever do in this entire module. Is there anything you do to go ahead and shake things up here, or do you go ahead and just say, you know, you just trek across the frozen tundra and it's just business as usual?
Following along with what I suggested earlier, I would have them also have to figure out where in the glacier the entrance is. It's protected from divination by strong magic, etc., etc. And you have to visit, and it doesn't have to be a big thing. It could be half a session or session, but just going to the what you call it, the Goliath tribes, speaking with them, or maybe heading out for that, or checking out that lost spire. It's something that you can fit in there, so there's a bit more, and maybe 2 or 3 options to choose from. Along the way, what I like to do, I like to suggest is that the characters run into Auril, or at least someone sent by Auril, another presence. And I know that there's an encounter in front of the Wrecked Glacier with an Frost Druid, with a Frost Druid, but that encounter is so underwhelming, difficulty-wise, that they may not even learn that she's a Frost Druid before she's dead at that level. So what I've suggested doing instead is, and that's of course assuming that the characters haven't yet killed Auril at her abode, that she shows up right around the entrance, stuff like that, kills off these friendly wrecked barbarians or whoever else the party has with them, and maybe the party barely escapes into the Caves of Hunger. I've written out a whole scenario for it. It's also on the blog for free, but like you have a wrecked barbarian shaman holding them back, and I can buy you 24 hours or something like that. Go ahead. Make it a bit dramatic, and also explain why she doesn't just kill them right then and there, but have some time before she shows up in Earthrun. So I'd certainly put something in along the way.
Absolutely. So something that I always harp on for a lot of these role-playing games is, of course, Wizards of the Coast is a U.S. company, and thus they write it in English. But, of course, that Codicil of White is written in English, which means that it rhymes in English, which means it'll never rhyme in any other language. So I talk about this all the time, but whenever you translate anything, it'll never rhyme ever. It's just not possible. It's just not how language works. Have you gone any way of addressing this, or are you just going to go ahead and read it, and that's that?
Well, I'm from Denmark, and in Denmark we're blessed with a decent public education. So and a necessity to learn English, because we're like, and we're only 5 million people, so we know that no one speaks Danish. So everyone in Denmark speaks English, and we just read it in English. But even so, also the room descriptions, it can get a bit tiring, because you don't want to read every room description in a different language, and don't want to read every rhyme. But no, I haven't done anything to change it, because
I was talking to someone who was translating it over to Spanish, and that's a nightmare, because you know it's just not possible.
I could imagine.
You know, this actually happens earlier on in the adventure, but something is written in Dwarvish, and then when it's translated to Common, it somehow rhymes. But that's not how language works.
Where's that? I'm just curious.
That was at Yarmouth.
Is that in?
At Yarmouth, there's a little something written in Dwarvish,
and there's the rhyme,
which I don't get it. The people, like, you know, you see that all the time in Indiana Jones like movies, where someone translates something that's 1,000 years old. It's not gonna rhyme. That's not how that works. I don't know why that triggers me so much. So chapter 6, you read off this Codicil White, and whether it rhymes or not, depending on your language, doesn't really matter. You open up, you go into the Caves of Hunger, and the Caves of Hunger is the biggest dungeon crawl of the entire module. It's this huge OSR type feel of dungeon crawl. Do you feel like this place works perfectly, or do you think that because of 5e mechanics, or because of the time pressure, or because of insert whatever, that the Caves of Hunger just doesn't really fit?
That's a difficult question, because once again, this is one of the parts I really like about the adventure, and I've seen a lot of hate for it, or a lot of dislike.
Yeah.
And everyone's entitled to so we can differ on this. I don't hate it. I don't think it's that big of a dungeon. It runs pretty fast if you don't go off on too many tangents, of course. And also, I think the time pressure works for it if the players are aware of the time pressure, and the DM helps them. Like, you need to disturb their long rest attempts. You need to play the vampire Noel a bit cleverly. Does it fit? No, of course it doesn't fit. It's completely random in the sense that it has very little to do with everything else. So in that sense, it doesn't fit. You could skip it, just as with the Durga. I personally wouldn't skip it. I think it's pretty cool if you run it the right way, or the way I would, for me. But I can certainly see some people not liking it. It sounds like you're maybe not the biggest fan.
No, I love it. I love the OSR dungeon. In fact, you know, that's my style. I love it. The funny thing is, though, is from what I understand, every single player that ever opens up the Ragged Glacier always thinks that they're going to step right into the Lost City. Like, every single time. They think that as soon as they open it up, they walk 10 feet, and then they're in the city. Yeah. And then everyone always gets blindsided by the fact that there's this huge cave system. And I like that. I like the fact of, like, you stepping into something and you're like, oh, man, where the heck are we? We're going to go through this thing. And then as they go through the thing, of course, they get jacked up by all the terrible monsters in there. They have to decide which way they go, left or right. They start getting attacked by, of course, Tekeli, and that's scary too. And here is where they can actually start getting the permanent stuff of going insane. So getting jacked up permanently is kind of a big deal, because in 5e, more often than not, when you get into any sort of combat, it doesn't matter if you can go ahead and take a little nap. So after crawling your way through, getting jacked up, getting beat up, going mentally insane, and potentially making more friends or enemies along the way in Chapter 6, we finally arrive to the grand finale, Chapter 7, the Lost City of Ythryn. So there's a lot of moving pieces here, a lot of locations, a lot of time you have to keep track of, and you know, there's a lot of things to go into it here. So one thing I want to go into is, do we allow the players to fight 3 bosses in a day? Because as written, it looks like you can go up against Auril herself, you can go up against the Demi-Lich Auril Arthas, and then Avarice can show up and just try and jack up the party. As written. So how do we handle the time in this chapter?
Yeah, that's something I think I dedicated a few pages to in the guide, because I love Chapter 7 as well, it should be said, and it's also kind of it's bad form of us to say that the Rime of the Frostmaiden is a railroad from Chapter 3 and onwards, because Ythryn is actually somewhat of a sandbox. It's at least more sandbox if you look at it. I think I like Ythryn. I like Ythryn, but the pacing Ythryn is all over the place, and it's very confusing, and it's as you say, a bit breakneck at the end if you allow the characters to fight 3 boss battles in a day. I think that's why I like having the pressure on them, having them know that Auril is coming. Because if you run it as written, they may not know that Auril is coming. They should know that we have to hurry before she arrives. And then, if at all possible, have them deal with Avarice after the first long rest, the first period in the city, if she's there, and then deal with Iriolathas. That's a difficult one. In the next adventuring day, or 2 days after that, and then after having a long rest, starting maybe activating the Mythalar to restore Icewind Dale. That's when Auril shows up. When they're fresh, she may send in some waves of monsters to wear them down and stuff like that, so you can get the short rest classes in there as well. You try and pace it out. Yeah, I would most definitely do that. And have Auril show up in the end if she is the main villain of the adventure, which I think she is.
Absolutely.
And I think that the Mythalar underneath Iolathas' spire is a perfect place for final boss battle. It's
that's where my group had their final boss battle, and it was pretty epic. Yeah. So of course in the book we're not given a way on ending, not one way to end the winter. So how many ways can the players actually win this campaign? Do you just go ahead and just let them have at it, or do you try and drive them to using a certain something? Because we get the idea that if you kill Auril, then it's over. If you go and activate the Mythalar, then you can go ahead and reverse the winter. If you summon a Tarask, then things are going to get jacked up. You summon the scroll, you could potentially try and kill her. You go back in time, you not have to worry about it. So what do you go ahead and do in this regard? Do you change anything at all, or?
I think that's where the DM at this point in running the adventure, the DM needs to fit events into what has gone previously in the campaign. One thing I suggest is that the players should learn about the time altering mechanisms available in Ithrin if 10 towns were completely destroyed. So they have, oh yeah, if we can find this artifact, now it's not about ending the wind, it's about turning back time entirely, because that's the only way we can restore 10 towns, maybe. And I also think that it's important that the endings, if you have it Auril, killing Auril and using the Mythala, coincide. Because if you have them kill Auril 2 days before using the Mythala or the other way around, it just becomes a bit weird. When did the adventure end? When did they meet their goal? In Denmark, we have a saying for that. We call it an American ending. When you think the movie's over, and you get another 20 minutes where it ends again.
I like
that's
that
not something
ending.
we do. That's not something we do in our fiction. When it ends, you can get 5 minutes of kisses and hugs or afterwards, but probably not. Anyways, that's also why I suggest Auril shows up after the Mythala has been activated, because then Auril is defeated, and the Mythala goes into effect and drives back the spell and stuff like that. Yeah, and I also suggest that Auril's spell should be permanent. So even if she is killed in Chapter 5, you still need to go to Ithrin to reverse it, and then Iriolathas is just the main final encounter of the adventure.
Absolutely. So we get these several options on how to beat Auril. You could try and just, summon the Tarrasque down on top of her, and then that creates its own set of problems. You could go ahead and just beat her up. You can do this, you can do that. But that is if your players win scenario. What happens if your players lose? Because as written, going back in time does mean that your players essentially lose, because they go so far back in time that they can't actually affect the situation at hand, right?
I love the time travel thing. That's one thing I've seen a lot of dislike for, and I can understand that, because it's really random the way it's written. It's more like, oh, you accidentally sent yourself 1500 years back in time, and now it's a completely different campaign.
Yep.
And that's a weird way to end a campaign. It's a very weird way to end a campaign, but it's also a really cool way to start a campaign.
Oh yeah.
And I think that if the DM is cognizant of that, or realizes what they're doing, and have something planned for it, having the players suddenly turn time back 1500 years is a really, really cool way to start an adventure that is about getting back to our time, finding another Netherese city or artifact that can throw us back the other way, perhaps, or what have you, stop the fall of the Netherese Empire. I think it could also be used with a bit of careful rewriting as a what you call it, not a complete defeat. So you're going up against Auril, and the wizard knows that in his bag he has, you have to rewrite some stuff, of course. He has the artifact that can throw them back 1500 years in time. So if they're losing, he might snap the rod and take that out. And that's a loss, yes, but it's also a chance to come back and fight another day. So I think that's a cool way to do it.
Yeah, I absolutely like the whole going back in time thing. If you have some D&D nerds with you, or you just go ahead and tell them that so you showed up and you know for a fact that the world's going to explode in just a short amount of time. What do? You are going to get those people that are going to say, hey, let's go ahead and confront the Netherese and say, hey, don't do that 12th level spell. Don't cause the weave to blow up. I think that could be a really epic little campaign there. And you can, and that will, if you are playing in the same universe with your group, that will have forever ramifications, which is awesome. I love running the same group of players through different modules and seeing how that affects the world. Yeah. And Icewind Dale, even though it is located basically out where it really shouldn't affect anything, in reality it does affect everything. And I think that permanency is fantastic to have in your campaigns. So,
and I also think that what I like about having the time travel thing in there is that it's an idea. You don't have to do it the way the book says. They just planted an idea in your head. So maybe it's not about, and I have to admit I can't remember. It's a staff or something. Maybe it's about when the mythola is activated. Oops, it want to go back to when it was deactivated last time, something like that. So you don't have to have them go through these hoops or do exactly this thing to go back in time. If you want them to go back in time right after defeating Auril and suddenly start a new campaign, you can absolutely do that. And I like that that's an idea that have been planted in our heads.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I warped it for my own campaign. I had it where the city itself moved back in time, so it was floating above Icewind, but it was still the present time, but with the past mixed. You know, it was confusing, it was jumbling, and my players were crazy enough to summon the Tarrasque onto the city too, so that was a clown fiesta. You know, but that added to the flavor of it, right? They're on top of a floating city that's now spiraling out of control. There's a Tarrasque rampaging around. Auril still right there fighting them tooth and nail. You know, that was probably one of the most epic conclusions to a campaign I've ever had.
It sounds amazing, yeah.
Yeah, it was great, and you know, and what was also great too is the person that broke the staff. They got transported to hell, and they had to make a deal with the devil to get sent back real quick. So that was fun too. You know, only fun times around here, and no fun.
That's how these that's how the 11+ campaigns go, right?
Absolutely.
Suddenly jumping around time and planes and stuff. It's awesome.
Yeah, I think this campaign does a tier 3, just starting off a tier 3 adventure well, because you go up against some really bad baddies and you do events that are going to shape the world around you. And I think that's why we love playing these games, because we like starting off small and then going from nobodies to somebodies. So yeah, I think that's pretty much covered the chapters, and of course your guides go into immense detail on how we can go ahead and cover all the chapters individually, and how we can do certain themes, and how we can, you know, introduce NPCs in a certain way. I think that is going to do it for today. So do you go ahead and sell yourself and go and tell us everything and anything, and everything is going to be flashing on screen right now, and it'll be links down below and all that. So yeah, tell me.
Yeah, well, I've written the guides in the DM's Guild. I think I'll send you over a coupon code for 20% off, so you have something to throw down below as well. Yeah, and there's the webpage eventyrgames.com. I have a mailing list where I send out some stuff. I try to keep it a good mix of free and paid. If you're paying money for it, it's probably because there's a lot of time put into maps and props and sheets and stuff, which the guides also contain. Yeah, I'm just doing a lot of D&D like you are, and that's about it, I think.
Alrighty. Yeah, thank you so very much. That was a blast to talk about, because Rime of the Frostmaiden is certainly one of my most favorite modules, I can already tell. It's going to be awesome down the line, but I think there is a lot of people that are confused about it right now. But I think that'll clear up over as time and people actually start running this module. I certainly have a blast with it, and I had a blast talking with you, and that is going to do it. So thank you so much for listening, everyone, and I'll catch you all in the next one.